Yes. Yeah, but I'll call you here in a little bit. But I know, baby. Just be careful, baby, and I'm proud of you. You're welcome. I love you.
Well, sir, welcome to the McPherson Opera House, Mr. Michael Martin Murphey. It's amazing being able to interview you here today. It's quite an honor, my friend. To give us a little bit of a preview of the show this evening.
The first half of the show is country, and the second half of the show is western.
Awesome.
That way I cover all the most important forms of music ever conceived in human history.
There you go. Now, you I'm sure got a chance to sound check out there. What did you think of the venue?
You know, the venue is just physically, visually beautiful, and the way that it's designed, you know, in the old opera house style, that always yields great acoustics. But this is a particularly clean, clear one. I noticed when I was playing my guitar during sound check that before we ever turned the sound system on, that people could hear my guitar on the back row.
Wow.
So, you know, these things were designed in Europe years ago before they had sound systems. Bring the people in a little bit closer. That's why they stack up those balconies the way they do.
Yeah.
And the finest concert hall in the country is Bass Hall in Fort Worth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's built on that same kind of plan. But this one has that Old West kind of a feeling, and since I'm going to be playing a lot of classic cowboy songs in the second half
Yeah.
and the western part of the show, it really fits. It makes me feel very much at home.
Yeah.
I like a Victorian kind of a feeling because
Yeah.
the West was Victorian.
Yeah. Now, you've had an amazing career, and I seen that you guys are selling a bunch of CDs out there.
You mean you're amazed that I had a career?
No, no. I'll tell you that I wish there was more country artists like you doing music today like that. So, and it's quite good. Now, give us a little bit of preview of some of the music that we're going to hear tonight.
Well, the first half of the show, I said was country, but
Yeah.
it's actually pop too. Wildfire is viewed as a country song, but it never was on the country charts. I see it as a western song and a cowboy song. It was on the pop charts, but it was never on the country charts. Country stations play it today. So the first half is pretty much a retrospective on my hits and some of my current albums that have songs on them that are not western, that are not cowboy songs. But I've done so much with cowboy music in the last 20 years of my career. I'm working on Cowboy Songs Volume 7 that I use the whole last half of the show to just do cowboy music. And I say cowboy music more than I say western music because there are cowboys all over the world. Anybody who's a stockman who takes care of cows is a cowboy. My new album that I'm putting out, which is not available here tonight, is about the cattle kingdom of other places, Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, Ireland, UK, pretty much.
Scottish cowboys.
Yeah. Well, Black Angus cattle, that's the standard, and that's where that breed came from. And you know, we often forget that our breeds of cattle here, the best ones, were really developed in Scotland and England a long time back. They really knew what they were doing with genetics that were not manipulated, you know, in a test tube, but just the way that they bred these animals. And of course they had constant shows and judging, but going all the way back to even the Celtic medieval days, you know, they had great cattle in there. And I've only seen a few films that bring this out.
Yeah.
You know, whenever you see you know, a film about the Celtic Wars and, you know, these kind of guys, Mel Gibson, you know, you don't see many cattle in the, but that was their life.
Yeah.
And that's where we get our cattle. So that's the latest. Is that I'm working on more of an international thing. Next album after that, we'll go to Africa and some
Wow.
other places and talk to Stockman and record some of the songs of their cultures. But I have to learn how to sing in African first. It's going to take me a little bit longer to do that. But at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, which I serve as an advisory board member,
Yeah.
we bring cowboys from all over the world.
Wow.
And I should say cowgirls too. Some people, want to be politically correct. The fact is that most cowgirls that are working professionals call themselves cowboys too.
Yeah.
It's great to be able to see what's happening right now, because it turns out that what has been vilified as overstocking cattle was actually not the problem with land going back to desert. Desertification is in fact caused by not enough livestock out there.
Oh, really?
And that's the latest thinking on the part of wildlife biologists, which has been around since Dr. Alan Savory, who was a wildlife biologist in Africa, brought back the elephants, brought back a lot of endangered species by allowing ranching and stock graziers inside the national parks, where they were losing all these lions and losing elephants. And the cattle brought back some diversity. See, cattle are not indigenous to North America, but they're indigenous to Africa, and they're indigenous to those areas.
Yeah.
But cattle do the same thing as buffalo. They're grazing ungulates. So it's really exciting right now. There's a world movement to try to stop desertification, which is one of the main causes of global warming, climate change, if you want to call it that. Because when you have bare ground, it's desert. When the sun hits it, it reflects back up and causes the temperature to warm. If you go out on a sidewalk and it's not covered with grass, you can fry an egg on the sidewalk in Kansas in July.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of an example of what happens with desert ground. So there's a world movement on right now. As a matter of fact, today in the Flint Hills, where was that?
By Manhattan.
Over by
The
Manhattan.
Conza Prairie.
At the Conza Prairie Center, they had a tallgrass prairie, a Prairies of the World conference that's going on right now with the conservation people. The Nature Conservancy was there.
Yeah.
Nature Conservancy has been attacking cattlemen for years and saying their overgrazing is causing all these problems. Now it's all come around to the fact that, okay, if overgrazing causes so many problems,
Yeah.
why is land going back to desert with only 33 million cattle on our American plains when you had 100 million buffalo, and that doesn't count any of the other grazing animals when Lewis and Clark went across that. The estimates that they have from their journals is that there were at least 100 million buffalo.
Wow.
And they were everywhere. And then you had, the elk, the prairie elk, which is now an endangered species, the deer, so forth and so on. The American species of sheep, the North American species of sheep, antelope,
Yeah.
and all these grazing animals grazing naturally in herds, all bunched together to protect themselves from predators. And as they moved around, they pretty much were their own aeration of the soil and their own fertilizer of the soil.
Wow.
And this brings back the grass. If you go to the Flint Hills today, it's the only place in Kansas really where they've taken this philosophy just naturally, because you can't farm it. You can't farm that land very well because it's too rocky. So they've always done this rotational grazing where they got stock a lot of cattle at one time, and that brings back the grass, and tall grass prairies in marvelous shape. So that's why they held this conference there. Well, I'm singing the songs of the culture that did that.
Yeah.
I'm singing, and it's an honorable profession, much more highly respected in the 19th century than it is today.
Yeah.
But the 20th century, it began to lose respect. Now that we're into the next millennium, it's starting to come back that, hey, wait a minute, what have we lost here?
Yeah.
We're spending tons of money on technology to try to change this global warming problem,
Yeah.
with technology. It would be much less expensive to just get a lot more cattle out on that land and have it managed.
Yeah.
And this does a double thing. This also gives a profession. It does something for people's jobs, you know.
Well, a lot of times
how to work.
people don't know where their food comes from anymore.
That's right.
There's people that'll drive around Kansas and they'll be like, well, how do they cut all this wheat? How do they cut all this grass? And it's like, see those cows? That's who's doing it.
See, in the 1960s, a book came out called Diet for a Small Planet, and it was a wrong-headed book because it said, you know, using grazing animals for food is the wrong deal. What we want to do is plant lots of soybeans and vegetable matter, and we can get a lot more protein on the fields. What they didn't take into consideration is that kind of farming requires a huge amount of water and uses a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, a lot of the ground in the plains really doesn't work well for farming. And that includes Kansas, a lot of Texas, and places like that. They do farm it, they do irrigate it, but it just isn't as successful with protein as animal protein.
Yeah.
So it's all coming back, it's all making a comeback, and singing the songs of the cowboy culture at this point in my life is a great reward for me,
Yeah.
and a satisfaction to know that I'm singing about a culture that could save the planet.
Yeah. Well, it has been an honor and a privilege to chat with you, my friend. And thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take
Mike.
care.